Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webcast, Navigating the Shift to Digital Data. My name is Michelle Kim, and I'm Mashery's Director of Demand Generation, and I'll be your host for today. So just a little housekeeping before we get started. This presentation is being recorded. All lines are on mute, and we will save some time and open it up for some Q&A at the end via the chat function. But feel free to enter questions at any time. The chat function is at the bottom right of the corner. So today, we're very excited about our special guest speaker Pete Moeykens, fellow location-based services from TomTom. Pete has been building state-of-the-art cartographic database production and maintenance systems for GDT, TeleAtlas, and TomTom since 1987. Throughout his career, Pete has been a leader in pioneering and implementing cutting-edge map production tools that feature advanced technologies such as distributed editing, transactional map updates, conflation, workflow management, and the use of feature-level metadata to prevent regression. In his current role as fellow for TomTom's Location and Live Services product unit, Pete continues to be responsible for technical development and strategy. In 2012, Pete spearheaded the effort to create a modern developers portal to expose TomTom's location-based services platform. Now, I'd like to turn it over to Pete.
Thank you, Michelle. Michelle is going to give control to me, and I'd like to thank her for giving me this opportunity to talk about TomTom and the story that happened last year in 2012. It's pretty exciting, and it really represents a great partnership between TomTom and Mashery. I'm going to open up my screen here. There you go. Michelle, I think everybody can probably see that now. So the story that we're going to be telling today is really one about how TomTom was able to take some core competencies and some technologies that we used internally and turn them into a new product, a new revenue stream. And for everyone who is on this webinar today, I'd like you to think about this opportunity of taking something that you have in your company. Maybe it's a technology, maybe it's a database, maybe it's a service that you already have, and being able to leverage that through the power of application programming interfaces, APIs, to turn it into a new product stream. So before we go any further, and with that said, why don't we talk about the agenda for today? So the first thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking a little bit about the evolution of mapping and where we've been over the years and how location-based services actually developed. The story starts back in the 60s, and it's a very interesting one. Then we're going to talk about TomTom, the company itself, and how it was able to go from a small little company that built little applications for personal digital assistants into the big company right now that is able to provide the world-class PNDs, personal navigation devices. Then we're going to talk about the application programming interfaces themselves and how they represented this new channel for getting revenue coming in. We're going to take a look at the things and the requirements, the tools that you need for API implementation. I'm going to give some examples of success with these APIs, maybe some screenshots, and then we're going to open things up to questions and answers. But let's start by talking about who TomTom is and what we're doing. So as this slide shows, TomTom went from being a business that was selling PNDs, those great devices that you stick on your windshield, to selling not just the PNDs, but also the very services, the very technologies that provide them. What we've done with the location-based services department is to be able to take the same routing functionality, the same traffic services, and make those available to anyone in the world. Now, TomTom is a big company. There's 3,500 worldwide employees. We're located in Amsterdam, but we have offices all around the world. I happen to be talking from Lebanon, New Hampshire, where we are in the same building that we were in since the 80s, since we were GDT and then TeleAtlas. And our building still has the same role of building the core map data for North America that provides the services necessary to give that great PND experience. but we're also the home here in Lebanon of the location-based services team. And it's the location-based services team that took those technologies and exposed them through APIs to the world to be able to offer this new product. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk a little bit about digital maps, the evolution of mapping and where we have been. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, you're going to see the world's first personal navigation device. It's actually just a magnifying glass that's looking at a map on a dashboard, because as long as there's been cars, there's been people who want to know where to go. And the traditional method of rolling down your window and asking a local person, how do I get there, has never really been the great way. And it's always been a cause of many arguments between husband and wife as to how to get from place A to place B. So the goal has always been able to create some kind of live navigation device. Now our story starts way back in the 60s when Don Cook invented, with some others, the concept of dime files. And a dime file was the very first digital map. And GDT was one of the first companies to actually build those digital maps in support of the United States Census Boundary Product, otherwise known as TIGER. Now, all through the years, when we started, map databases were big and they were unwieldy and the data was complex. And when somebody wanted to buy a piece of a map data, they would actually have to buy a magnetic tape, a big, huge tape. And if you were lucky, you would get one city on that tape. But through the years, obviously technology increased, things got faster, magnetic storage got better, and we started shipping people, instead of magnetic tapes, hard drives and CDs and DVDs. And we started to provide all of this data on other kinds of media. But still, if you wanted to use the map, you still had a problem. You had to call us up. You had to order the product, you had to wait for the product to arrive, and then it was just data. It was just information sitting on a disk, and you had to write software to be able to use it. And that's where services come in, because we're going to take that data and we're going to make it easy to use for everybody around the world. So what I'd like to do now is talk a little bit about the history of TomTom, the company. And our history actually starts way back before the left-hand side there in 1987. It's not even on this particular chart, but it starts with the companies like ETAC and Geographic Data Technology having this vision of being able to create a personal navigation device. They started creating the data necessary to do that, even though there was no hardware for it to be able to really come to fruition. But then at the year 2000, the very first thing happened that really made it a reality. In the year 2000, all the cartographers out there know about what Bill Clinton did. In May, he turned off what was called selective availability of GPS signals. Up to that point, if you had a GPS, your accuracy, if you were lucky, was 30 meters plus or minus. And that was caused by an artificially induced error in the GPS signal. For security reasons, the military wanted that. But President Clinton said, nope, shut that off. And the day he shut that off, everyone who owned a GPS unit suddenly got an increase in functionality. Instead of being 30 meters accurate, you could all of a sudden get GPS units that were accurate down to a meter or two. That was absolutely fantastic. Something else happened in 2004. Not only did TomTom introduce the first PND, but technology got to a point where the very first 1 gigabyte SD card was produced out on the marketplace. And what this did was it allowed somebody to have on this little teeny chip the entire North American database or an entire European database, and they could actually swap that out. And I remember my very first TomTom 1 that had a little slide in the front where you could push in the SD card and put in a new database. Until then, the GPS signals were not accurate enough. The hard drives were not big enough or fast enough, and the processors were not fast enough, and the hardware wasn't inexpensive enough. But at 2004, it all came together. Suddenly the databases could be used. Suddenly the PNDs became a reality. At that point, TomTom's experience with PNDs really exploded. And because of the success of the PNDs, TomTom was then able to increase its capabilities by acquiring some other companies, one of which was a fleet management company that had expertise in taking all of the trucks that belong to a particular company and managing where they're traveling on a day-to-day basis. After that, they acquired another company that enabled them to actually keep track of HD traffic. In 2008, I came on board with TomTom when TomTom acquired TeleAtlas. Up to that point, TomTom and TeleAtlas were partners where we would supply, as TeleAtlas, the data to TomTom, and all of a sudden, now TomTom had the data that they needed to drive the PNDs. From that point on, things just got even better. We started working with automotive companies, and we finally signed this global content deal with Apple. What this chart is actually missing is what has happened in 2012, which is the standing up of the first developer portal to host the location-based services, products, and services. So on this next slide, I want to talk about digital mapping. And what is digital mapping? Because by now, everybody on this webinar has likely gone onto the internet and used a digital map, a map that you can zoom in, pan, enter in an address, and basically explore the world around you with just the click of your button. Everybody knows these things. And several years ago, TomTom had this wonderful map. We had these wonderful routing capabilities, but people didn't know about it. So we decided to create something called the web-based route planner. This was a website, routes.tomtom.com. It still exists, and you can go there today. That was designed to show off our map data, our routing, and our location, and now our live traffic. And when we did that, we decided that we had to create a system for doing that. So we contacted our IT department, and we said we need these computers. And they put the computers in a data center, and they made sure the air conditioning and the power supplies were correct. And we built the web services behind our firewall to be able to house this and host this website. Well, then something really surprising happened. People actually came and said, we want to use your data. So what we realized was that these services that were being used internally, both to help us edit our map database and through our public-facing website, it was a potential product. Excuse me while I go in the wrong direction there. So what we decided to do was to say, okay, customers want to use TomTom's data and put maps on their websites and apps, so let's enable them to do that. So we said, okay, we need to expose our web services to the rest of the world, so we're going to open up our firewall. We need a system to make sure that only those people who are authorized to use them can use those. So, like many other companies, we opened up Excel and we created a spreadsheet. And in that spreadsheet, we started entering people's names and their email addresses, and we assigned an API key. And so we had this master spreadsheet. That was our entire project management plan. And it worked for a while. People started using it and they liked it. But the more people who came to us saying we'd like to use our services, and the more people that knew about that, the more we realized that we needed a faster way of being able to bring customers on board, and that a single spreadsheet was definitely not going to be the solution in the long term. So we had to come up with a new system, and it had to be low risk, and it had to get to the marketplace as quickly as possible. That's when we finally realized that APIs need to be a real official product. So what about APIs? What is it that's so magical about an API, and what is an API? So throughout this entire presentation, both myself and Mashery are going to talk about APIs, but there's no magic to it. All they really are, an API, an application programming interface, is just a collection of web services. So all they are servers that are sitting on a back end waiting to receive a question for you. That question might be as simple as, what's the town name at this latitude and longitude? And that web service via the API will return the actual name of that town for you. They're the foundation. APIs are the foundation of what the industry calls a service-oriented architecture. And a service-oriented architecture is marked by defining the communication, the messages, the questions that get sent back and forth between applications. And it doesn't care about how that works. All it cares about is the question that's being asked and the answer that's being given. And so by not worrying about the technology, APIs are extremely powerful, because if somebody wants to change the technology that serves up the answer, they can still do that. The question's still the same, the answer's still the same. And that's why APIs are so powerful. The other thing about APIs is that unlike the old databases that we used to put on the magnetic tapes and the hard drives, APIs, they actually supply functionality, not just data. They answer the questions that you really want. They expose both your data, your services, and your core business logic to the world in ways that other people really want. They're demanding. So with that, let's actually talk about the APIs themselves. So our location-based services consisted of 4 basic functionality. The first is a map tile display. On the left, you can see an example of that. It's got streets and buildings. That's coming from our core database. And as a user, you can say, for this given window, I want the map delivered. And the map will be delivered as industry standard raster tiles. These are just JPEGs or PNGs, and you can display them on the screen. So these pre-rendered maps, rendered at 19 or 20 different zoom levels, are the things that are delivered whenever we talk about map tiles. The second service is geocoding, and geocoding is the capability of being able to type in an address and find the latitude and longitude of that address. Now, geocoding is not as easy as it sounds, because although we might understand the addressing standards of the Netherlands or Canada or the United States, to create a global geocoder that is capable of entering in any address in the world and being able to bring you to that location is very difficult. So that geocoding service is one we're very proud of. There's a counterpart to geocoding we call reverse geocoding, where you can give the service a latitude and a longitude and it will tell you the name of the street. So that's the opposite of specifying an address and getting the latitude and longitude. That's the second half of geocoding. Next, we have routing. And routing is exactly what you think. It's a web service where you give it a latitude and longitude of an origin and a destination, and you tell it things like, I want to be able to avoid traffic, or I want to be able to avoid toll roads. And it will return to you a list of the points that you need to travel. And it will return it in one of 2 ways, either as a bitmap image like you're seeing on the screen here, another JPEG or PNG file that you can display to the user, but it'll also return it as an XML or a JSON format. That's a computer readable format where if you wanted to create an itinerary or an offboard router or a detailed list of the instructions, then you can do that. So we give you both flavors. And then on the far right, we have the last service that we're currently providing. And that last service is traffic. Traffic is something that TomTom does better than anyone in the entire world. And the way that we do it is just really groundbreaking. Not only do we contact local suppliers of traffic that know about traffic accidents, slowdowns in traffic, blocked roads, constructions, those kinds of things, but any device that TomTom has out in the field that is connected to the internet, and that's all of the PNDs and the iPhone and the Android applications, they're actually acting like little sensors. They know that you're at a given location and that you're driving along. And we compare the speeds of the people who are driving on the roads to the historical speed for that road. So we know when something is wrong. And we can create this traffic data flow by fusing all of these traffic sources together. We call that our traffic fusion engine. It's very powerful. And if you make a request to our service for a window, a latitude and longitude window, we'll give you back all of the traffic incidences. And just like routing, we'll give it to you in 2 different flavors. 1, as an image where you can display it on the screen, or 2, as a computer readable XML or JSON format. Those are our services. Now there's one other service that we're going to market with very soon, which is our POI and places search, so that you can do things like say, give me all of the coffee shops within a radius of this latitude and longitude. All of these services work great, but as a programmer, there are often times when you want to be able to use these services very quickly and not have to write a lot of software. That's where software development kits or SDKs come in handy. So we have 3. We have a JavaScript SDK for people who are doing the web. that allows you to put these maps and these functions up on your web page in literally 1 or 2 lines. So if you want to create an actual routing application, a web application, you can do that using our JavaScript SDK in just 1 or 2 lines. These SDKs wrap up all of the calls to the API for you to make it very easy. So you don't have to write any software to handle the panning and the zooming and all of that kind of thing. We also have an Android, and my favorite, the iOS SDK, for programming on Apple devices. So with that, let's talk about the requirements for success, because if we were to take all of our services and go to market with these APIs, there were several things that we needed to deal with. A spreadsheet wasn't going to cut it any longer. We had to think about our APIs as actual products. And when we thought about our APIs as products, we had to make a distinction between those features that we were going to provide to users that make money and those features that just help the user use the services to make us money. A little bit like the selling of the razor blade handles to make money on the razor blades. In our case, we make money from the APIs. The APIs are the products that you sign up for. And if you start calling our APIs, you'll be charged on a per transaction basis. The SDKs we give away for free because those enable you to use the APIs. So this first step of being able to determine what is an actual product is the most critical one. And you can't think of the APIs as software. You really do need to think of these things as products, because the products have all kinds of requirements that go with them that I'm going to talk a little bit more about in just a few moments. So let's go on to the second requirement. The second requirement is to make sure that whatever solution we have for taking these technologies and bringing them up to the world and delivering them as APIs reduces risks and moves our system to the cloud. And why the cloud? Well, if you remember right, I was talking about our data center and the air conditioning and making sure we have the servers. We don't want to spend our time worrying about that. And customers don't want to have to worry about whether or not we have the appropriate power supplies and those kinds of things. And the other thing that's really important about the cloud is that when technologies are on a proven system, they help to bring customers on board more easily. So when we tell people our systems are hosted on the Amazon cloud, they really have a sigh of relief. They're glad that we're not using our own data centers any longer. And they know that other people have been extremely successful using these technologies. So it lowers the barriers that any particular customer might have with regards to our system. Cloud technology isn't just about scaling, although that's important. It's also about that bringing new customers on board and giving them the sense that you really know what you're talking about. There's another requirement, and that third requirement is that we need to be able to create this one single web presence where all of the developers can go to and they can get started very, very quickly. So when we decided to do this, we wanted the vision to be that a developer would go to developer.tomtom.com, that's developer.tomtom.com, and get everything that they need to be able to get started using our APIs, to sign up for API keys, to register, to get forum support, to get a sample code, to be able to download documentation, and to actually be able to try out the services right there and then without writing any code whatsoever. So that's a lot. That's a lot more than just a spreadsheet that we've got in Excel that's holding on to people's API keys. When we looked at that, it sounded like a pretty daunting task. We really said, ugh. But we knew that there was options out there that made it so that we wouldn't have to do all of that ourselves. And there's a little foreshadowing here. That's going to be Mashery. So there's another part, though, of part number 3. And the third part is we needed to create a sales kit for our internal sales team. See, a sales kit is what teaches your salespeople what they're actually selling. And for a company that sold PNDs and just core databases, selling the concept of web services was new to them. So we had to have many different training sessions. We had to create the kinds of training materials and training sessions for the sales teams. Because if the sales teams did not see this as a product, they weren't going to sell it. And if they didn't understand it, they weren't going to be able to sell it. So that was another requirement for being able to go to market. Now, there's one more requirement that I hinted to earlier, and it has to do with the cloud, and it's preparing for success. Because so many companies have created a technology, but they weren't prepared for success. And as soon as people came on board, they overwhelmed their systems. So here's where I'm talking about true scaling. I'm talking about the ability to be able to multiply the amount of users who are using your system by a factor of 25x or more overnight. So the way that we've done that is by making sure that every component that makes up our system, our location-based services and the APIs, is scalable. So that's the back end, to be able to host the data and the services and to be able to scale up and scale down as necessary. Scaling down, by the way, is just as important for cost control as scaling up. And also the front end, to make sure that if people are hitting what is a single point of entry, that single point of entry is capable of scaling. That's Mashery as the single point of entry, by the way. So we knew that we had to handle all of these requirements in order to be able to go to the cloud. I'm going to summarize a little bit now. Let's say it's the beginning of 2012, January 2012. At this point, TomTom has services. We have a location-based services that is housed in our own data center using our own technology, serving up internal customers and one or two external customers, right? That's the beginning of 2012. What we needed to do was to find a way to be able to make our vision of a single developer platform one that handles and scales a reality. So what we did was we talked to Mashery. We called them up and we said, we've got this problem. We heard that you guys have solved this problem before. And they started to work with us in terms of what we wanted to achieve. They gave us advice. They showed us their technology. They showed us their system for content management of websites so that if we wanted to create a developer.tomtom.com, we could do it very quickly. They would host the website for us. They taught us about their scalable system. And we started to have this communication. Obviously, because I'm an engineer and like to build things myself, I had to ask myself, is this tools that we could build ourselves? Is this something that we might be able to do on our own? And the answer, of course, was yes, we could do it on our own, but it would take 2 or 3 years. And what Mashery brought to the table was a proven track record of doing this. So not only did they save us the ability to do all this work, but they made us get to the marketplace really quickly. I'll go over the schedule in a second. When we used Mashery, when we contacted them and decided to partner with them, they were able to market our APIs as products, right? They had the same vision that we did. Mashery is all about mashing together APIs, and they see APIs as products, so it fit our vision perfectly. As I mentioned before, minimizing risk and cost by coming to market with a proven solution. Mashery is on the cloud as well. They use the same Amazon cloud. So they representing the front end of our system, the part that does all of the API checks and the throttling on a per user basis. They handle all of that using Amazon cloud technology as well. Then the fourth bullet, develop a branded developer portal. When people came to developer.tomtom.com, their first comments were, what a great looking professional website. It is the face of our product. It needs to look as good as possible. Mashery gave us advice on what was important and what was critical. And even today, they're continuing to review our products, our services, and our branding to make sure that it is as effective as possible. Creating a sales kit to educate our team, that was our responsibility, but it was still something that we needed to do hand in hand with Mashery because our salespeople needed to understand what Mashery's role was. That idea of Mashery handling all of the API key management for us and being able to create the infrastructure for building out the APIs themselves. And finally, they were able to anticipate growth by ensuring scaling capabilities. So at this point, what I'd like to do is to just talk some about the things that have been created using our systems. Here's a great example. This is an iOS application called Field Collector. What it enables anyone to do is to go out with their iPhone and take photographs. We call it evidence in the industry, evidence that something exists. So you might take a photograph of your favorite pub or your favorite store, and you can create this as a point of interest using this application. You can enter information about the actual address, all kinds of attributes. If you're taking a picture of a speed limit sign, you can do those. And it is on the back end using our services. The map display is all TomTom maps. When you're at a latitude and longitude and it automatically fills in the street name for you, it's doing that using our reverse geocoder. You can even have access to the live traffic and routing from within this app if you wanted to. This is a great example of an application that is built upon our technology. Let's look at another one. Here's another great site. It's actually Dutch Rail out in the Netherlands, and they are using our routing, but they're not using our routing to route cars from point A to point B. Instead, what they're doing is they're trying to convince people to leave their cars at home and use the train instead. And the way they do that is by presenting a TomTom map. That's our TomTom web service you're seeing there on the screen with the map. They ask you where you're going, your origin and your destination, and then they run two routes. They run the route in our service, assuming that you're using a car, and they get the travel distance, and then they show you the same route if you were to use a train, and they show you how much time you're able to save. Now, we want people to use cars, so they use our PNDs, but we have to admit that this is an extremely clever use of our routing algorithms. This is a website that's publicly available using our services. Okay, getting toward the end here. Let's talk about results. So how do we measure results? Well, one way of measuring results is by looking how many hits to our system are being made on a daily basis. And from this chart, which is showing cumulative number of LBS transactions, you can see that since we went live in late October, that's November 15th over on the left-hand side, we've been getting millions of transactions a day. So maybe an average of 1 million or so with a couple of spikes. Usually those spikes are when we bring a new customer on board and they start really using the system hard. So those are literally millions of transactions that we have been able to do. And I guess I left out when we actually went to market, but it's important to note that we went to market in October. So that's less than 10 months from the time that we had our system housed in our own data centers to the time when we stood up a developer portal, a scalable cloud-based backend, a Mashery front end for handling all of our services, and all of the reporting, all of the sales training that need to get done, and even the link to our billing department. And we were able to do that in 10 months because we relied on experts in their field, and I'm talking specifically about Mashery here. So let's wrap things up, because I'm sure we want to save some time for some questions here. So first of all, TomTom transitioned from selling PNDs to also selling the services that provide them. We took the technology that empowered our PNDs to be the best in the world, and we exposed that technology to the world using application programming interfaces. With these APIs, we were able to distribute all of these services quickly using cloud technology, specifically Amazon Cloud. Mashery's API management solution satisfied all of TomTom's implementation requirements. And I didn't talk a lot about Mashery's capabilities, but you should know that they have complete content management systems for doing things like creating endpoints. So those are the actual URLs that get called, for managing all of your users, for tracking daily reporting on errors that you're getting, on the number of throughput. It's a fantastic content management system that would have taken us years to write. And finally, over the past 6 months, we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of leads. People are interested in using our services. Portal registrations, those are people who've actually signed up to use our system. And transactions, the actual calls that are being made through developer.tomtom.com. So I want to finish by saying something that I started with, which was, if you're listening to this webinar, you may be sitting on gold. within your own company. Maybe you have some technology or some data that if you were to expose, people would want to use. It may be a perfect example for APIs. So I urge you to think about the kinds of technologies that you as a company use on a daily basis and ask, are these core competencies that we can expose to the rest of the world? And if so, then feel free to contact me with more questions about how we are able to do the same thing with our technologies. So with that final comment, I'm going to say thank you to Mashery for helping us become a success, and I will hand these webinar controls back to Michelle, if I can hit the right button.
Thanks, Pete.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much. So let's see. Here we go. So before we get into the Q&A, I just wanted to spend 2 very quick minutes on what Mashery does for those of the people on the call that are unfamiliar with us and what we do. So as you heard from TomTom's story, a successful API program needs to be relevant to your business, drive value, and scale as your program scales. Mashery's API management platform sets you up for success because we're the only one that enables you to manage the 3 essential elements of your APIs: your partners, your APIs as products, and your traffic. Our holistic approach to API management goes beyond our platform. We also provide strategy services and developer outreach services. Strategy services can help you maximize business impact of your API, discover new revenue opportunities, and reduce complexities of doing business with partners. Mashery Developer Outreach is not just about public APIs. It's about delighting all API consumers. Our team has the expertise to help you build the developer program that's right for your business, from initial developer recruitment to ongoing co-marketing programs. And finally, really quick, we just wanted to showcase some of our other customers. And as you can see here, TomTom is in very good company. So with that, I'd like to just open it up for Q&A. If you have any questions, you can start typing them in to the to the questions field. Let's see. So for the first one here, I've got one, looks like, for you, Pete. So can I use TomTom's services with my data and other third-party services?
Right, absolutely, positively. As a matter of fact, if you go to developer.tomtom.com and download some of the SDK examples, you'll see how easy it is to take things like your address list and to create overlays on maps with all of the locations of your customers. And not only can we use your data, but our licensing terms are really quite flexible, whereas some of our competition wouldn't allow you to use, for example, the geocoding results on any map but their own. We don't have those kinds of restrictions. So if you want to use geocoding from some other service and use our map to do the display, or perhaps you want to do our geocoding service and use some other map, you can do that. There's no technical and no licensing restrictions on those kinds of uses, and we urge people to come up with clever ways of using their data in combination with our maps.
Great. And then so for another question here. So what geographic coverage do you have?
Well, my first answer is we're global. But it's not quite that easy because there are still parts of the world that we haven't mapped as well as others, and there are still parts of the world where things like our points of interest are not quite as great. But I think there's a statistic somewhere about the percentage of the population of the world, and basically it's in the high 90s. So if you want exact details on our coverage, and I should know these things offhand, but you know, it's a big planet. Go to our developer portal and just type in the word coverage in the search bar, and you'll get a spreadsheet there for every single country and whether or not we have maps, geocoding, routing, traffic, and all of those things. For the most part, it's all of North America, all of Europe, lots of places in Asia, Australia, you name it. I hope that answers.
No, I think that that does. And so for another one here, so someone is asking, so how much does it cost?
Oh, okay, that's a great question. When we came up with a pricing for our system, we wanted to make sure it was competitive. So we went to the other providers of map data and we tried to figure out what pricing they used. And what we ended up doing was to come up with a tiered basis where the more of our services that you use, the cheaper it gets. Generally speaking, these numbers are extremely competitive, if not better than the other services. I don't have the details right now, but if you go to our developer portal and hit the Contact Us button, we'll make sure that a salesperson gets in touch with you.
Great. So I think we've got another one here just about Mashery here. So does Mashery have a product demo? So we actually offer a live product demo on a bi-weekly basis, every Wednesday, every 2 weeks, Wednesdays at 10 a.m. The next one is next Wednesday. I believe it's the 27th. We'll be sure to send out that. You can sign up on our website, but we'll also be sure to send out that information with a follow-up email. Let's see here. So let's see, what was your biggest challenge in launching your developer portal? So, Kate?
That's a really good question. At first you might think it was technology based, but it actually wasn't technology based because engineers, we can basically go with the flow and get done what needs to get done. I think our largest hurdle has actually been getting people to do this sort of brain shift of being able to say these services are actually products. So the sales team, we actually had to do a lot of training. I mentioned that in the presentation, but we had many different meetings, and then we had follow-up meetings, and still to this day, it's kind of difficult to think of what we're selling as an actual product. So I would say the largest challenge we had was making that shift in paradigm from selling either a physical PND that you have in your hand or a physical DVD of data to selling web services.
Awesome. Thank you. So another one here, it looks like it's for you. So I think on that note, what's helped to drive the increase in developer portal registration?
So we haven't just sat back and hoped people would hear about what we've done. We've actually done press releases. We've worked with Directions Magazine to be able to do several webinars, and we've noticed that the increase in registrations to developer.tomtom.com, again, that's developer.tomtom.com, has increased whenever we do a webinar or some kind of a press release. So I think that's probably the principal driving factor, actually advertising what we're doing.
Great. Then also in terms of, so I guess what benefits were there of running your traffic through Mashery in the cloud?
Okay, when you say traffic, we always think of traffic as in cars out there, but you're talking about digital traffic.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that is kind of important to understand is exactly what Mashery is, because without understanding that, it's hard to answer the question. And I want to make sure everyone on this webinar understands that Mashery represents a location where all of your services are going to be funneled through. It's sort of like a single point of entry. At that location, you can do all kinds of things. You can do security control. You can do what I call first order caching, and Mashery handles that for us. Mashery also handles all of the authentication of the services, and Mashery also helps us with reporting when something goes wrong. Just this morning we had a call from a user who was saying they were getting a bad request, and we went to Mashery and we asked them for a report, and they gave us a report, and sure enough it was just a user error in terms of forming the function. But those are really important factors: security, API management, all of those things. Mashery does that all.
Well, thanks, Pete.
You're welcome. Yeah, you can tell I'm kind of a Mashery fan, huh?
I like that. So how did you convince your management to pay for Mashery instead of DIY?
Oh, that's a great one. So we went to Mashery and we asked, how much is it going to cost? And Mashery's answer was a little bit like my earlier answer, which was a little wishy-washy, as in it sort of depends. It depends on the amount of traffic you're going to go through. It depends on what services you use. But your salesperson, Greg Meany, I don't know if you know him, he used a line that I'll never forget, and I used it with my management, which was to to use Mashery for a year, it's going to cost the same as it would cost to hire an engineer for a year. And when you think about it that way, it makes perfect sense because there was no way in a year's time one engineer was going to be able to create all of the technology that Mashery brought to the table. So we were able to very easily convince our management team that the cost that we would spend in Mashery would not only be cheaper than what it would take if we were to do it ourselves, but we would also be able to go to the market quicker. So using those two things, cost savings and time to market.
Awesome. So, and I guess another one just on kind of, along that vein is, did you consider other API management platforms?
We did, and I've been very careful not to mention their names because I don't want to sound like I don't want to make them sound any any worse or anything like that because they all have their strengths and weaknesses. Um, we we looked at there are two other principal API management providers out there. And we looked at them both, and believe it or not, we continue to look at them. We're not going to ignore the possibility of other advances. Um, but it's safe to say that Mashery had the completer solution. They were more mature. They were also a little more well known in the industries that we were looking at. So all of those things really came together to point to Mashery. Wait, there's one other thing that's really important. And it's probably more important than the technology. When we worked with Mashery, the people that we worked with at Mashery made it worthwhile. They were helpful. They were friendly. They were fun to work with. They had a passion for the business that they were in, very much like we had a passion for all of this map data. So there was really a great cultural and personality fit there as well. And don't underestimate how important that is because it really is important in terms of success of a project.
Great. And then so we have just time for one last question.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, do some of the services built using your APIs come into TomTom's services portfolio as well? That,
Michelle, could you say that again? I think I didn't quite hear it. There was a little.
do some of the services built using the APIs come into TomTom's services portfolio?
Come into services for them. I'm not sure I really understand the question here. Um,
So what we can do then, we can follow up with the asker after the
okay.
session.
All of our services that we provide go through Mashery and they're part of our portfolio. Internally, within our company, we have internal departments, other departments that have web services that they use for map production and for all kinds of technology. And those are not currently going through Mashery. We're still keeping our internal service-oriented architectures behind our own firewall. Maybe that was the question.
Yeah, no, I think that, and we'll follow up with them to make sure that that was
Okay.
they wanted. And then we just have the one last one, and this is just, someone says, Pete, you mentioned the audience can contact you directly, and we're asking for your contact information. And so I just went ahead and I pushed it onto the very last slide with Pete's email address right here.
Great.
And I want to confirm with you, Pete, that's okay if people contact you?
Absolutely, and that is my correct email address.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today, and thank you, Pete, so much for a very informative presentation.
Thank you, Michelle. It was a lot of fun, and it was really great talking about our success over the last year.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining, and have a great day.
Bye.